So yeah, good evening. Welcome to Norfolk Developers. This evening we're joined by Ryan Howard. He'll be talking about the Cypress testing framework, but I'll leave him to introduce himself. Just a brief talk about events upcoming for Norfolk Developers in October. We've got Nordev React next week, the Lean Coffee Roundtable format. Very popular and could quite easily lead in with conversations coming from the Wednesday stream. So October's Wednesday streams are going to be with Sean. Going to be building the Hablytics tag journal app, but in Blitz. So a lot quicker probably. They will be coming at a different time, 8:30 Wednesdays. So yeah, join us on YouTube as per usual. Many more in the pipeline. So yeah, it's just a brief mention to that. Learn to build full stack React apps with Blitz.js. As per usual as well, every Friday, join us for the virtual social clubs, Fridays, 5:30 till late. It might be a little bit railroaded this week by some games of Among Us, but depending on the numbers, we'll split out and make different rooms and stuff. We can use Zoom to split their topics and stuff. So yeah, join us anytime. We go until the early hours of the morning. So yeah, when you've got a spare moment, come by, give us a wave. Discord, if you're not on it, join it. The link's there. As Sean says, you've got moments to scan the QR code. I hope you're quick. Otherwise, the links are all over the place. You'll find them on the Twitters. They're probably in the description on the YouTubes. While I'm talking about YouTube, obviously drop us a like, dislike, subscribes, all of those things. We've just, talking of Discord, cleared this quarter's challenge. So congratulations to Andy, who is the new proud owner of a Pimoroni voucher. Quarterly challenge, basically based on messages. We'd like to do it on a kind of Stack Overflow style system. But so yeah, give us a shout if you want to build that for us. That would be pretty awesome. Discord bots, maybe we're quick kind of cheeky shout out to Kev. Anyway, Patreon, we're still looking for organization sponsors, so get in touch. We do, meanwhile, have these fantastic patrons already subscribed, patronage. Upcoming as well this weekend, if I can sort it out, there will be a Discord badge to go along with your patronage, just so you show your support. But anyway, I'm going to get out of the way. Let's chat about Cypress and testing, and I'll hand over to Ryan. Thanks, Ryan.
Hello. Let me present my screen. Cool. Just give me the thumbs up if you can see that. Perfect. Cool. So, Cypress. So when I first thought about doing a talk for Norfolk Developers, I was trying to work out what would be a good topic to talk about. And know your audience. I'm aware it's Norfolk Developers, so I'm expecting that there's quite a few developers here. So I was trying to think of a testing topic that might engage developers well. And then I thought about Cypress. And one of the reasons I thought about Cypress is it's maybe one of the few testing tools, frameworks, whatever you want to call it, out there, which is just as focused, if not more focused, towards developers than testers. So I thought it would be quite a good one to explore a bit further. So the agenda. So I thought I'd just do a quick introduction of myself, then a real brief description of what I mean or we mean by end-to-end testing, because it's a phrase which comes up quite regularly with with Cypress. Then we'll look at why Cypress, why I picked Cypress tonight, and why you might pick Cypress as your testing tool on your future projects. Then we'll have a look at a brief overview of Cypress, what it is, the architecture, the key features, and then at the end I'll do a quick demo, jump into the code. So first of all, about me. So I am Ryan. I am a software tester and have been for about 10 years now. I've been contracting for the last 5 years. And recently I founded HowQA, which is a software testing consultancy. I'm also the co-organiser of East Anglia Quality Assurance meetup. And that phrase, when I'm not testing, I am either watching cricket or football or drinking gin. I'm only actually good at doing one of those things. But yeah, so that is me in a nutshell. So let's first have a look at what we mean by end-to-end tests. So typically I've found that there's a real disconnect between what a developer might think of testing and what a tester might think of testing. And the old-fashioned split is that if you're a developer, you do unit testing, nothing else, and then the tester kind of picks up everything else. Now, I'm not sure that's strictly true anymore, but it's certainly a traditional view. And tools like Cypress, one of the aims of these tools is to encourage developers to write their own end-to-end tests. So for me, the focus of an end-to-end test and what we mean by end-to-end testing is a test to ensure that the full workflow or business process performs as it's expected to from the beginning to end, from start to finish. So we're not focusing on a particular code level function. We're focusing on as I say, a full end-to-end process. And that could be logging into an application or adding an item to a shopping basket or checking out or that sort of thing. So I play this. This is the idea of this is potentially what happens when you don't run end-to-end tests. You might have two working features, but two working functions, but maybe put together they don't quite work, and that's basically just an excuse to watch that video because I quite like it. So why Cypress? I've mentioned it's previously that it's a tool built by developers for developers and testers, of course. But the whole ethos behind this is that actually, if you can provide developer teams with a tool that are actually relatively familiar with the fundamentals of, that you might be able to encourage them to write more tests. Traditionally, if you want to write web tests, web front-end tests, you would have to reach for a tool like Selenium, which, as good as Selenium is, it's notoriously difficult to kind of set up. You have to consider, first of all, the language you're going to use. Secondly, which framework are you going to pick? Which assertion library are you going to use? And the idea behind Cypress is that actually, consider it a positive or a negative, you don't get the choice. It gives it all to you. And that means it's really easy to set up. It literally is, if you're familiar with Node, it is a single npm install, and that gives you everything you need to get started. You don't have to then go and find the right framework or test runner or assertion library. You can work with everything that you've been given in that single install. It's also built with sort of debugging in mind. So it's designed to make debugging easier without having to put breakpoints in your code or use the traditional kind of console log messages that you might see in other testing frameworks just to work out exactly where your code's going and what it's doing. The whole idea of this is that actually Cypress provide the tools that you need to debug up front to save you the time. And all of that really equals a better user experience. There are so many testing frameworks and tools available, but there's none quite like Cypress in terms of the user experience and how you can write tests and how you can run tests. It's very different to what else is available in the market at the moment. So let's have a look at the key features. I will go through these a bit more when I do the demo, but some of the real core features for Cypress that stand out is the idea of time traveling. So when you run a test, you can actually step back and see the impact that previous steps have had on an application. So if you've got a test of 10 steps, you can step through each one of those steps, view a before and after image of the DOM to really understand what's happened at each step level. And these aren't just screenshots. This is interactable. You can interact with the DOM whilst looking at these, which I'll show you a bit more in a minute. So secondly, we have real-time reloads. So what you can do with real-time reloads is you can be editing your test in your IDE, and as you save that test, Cypress will go ahead and rerun that test for you. So you can literally have your test runner and your code open at the same time. You can be making changes in your code, and you can see those changes and how they're impacting your test in real time. Each time you add a step, you save your test file. That's going to run your test and get you to that final step in your test. This is really good for things like TDD. So Cypress have got some blogs on how you can use the application for TDD, but the idea is that actually you can write your next step in your test as you're writing the code. So if I want to add a new field to my registration form, if I want to add email, I can write my line of test code there first. I can run it. It's going to fail. I can write my application code. I can rerun it straight away, and I should see my test go that slight bit further in the process. Automatic waiting. So this is a new feature, relatively new feature for Cypress. So again, one of the tricky things with UI testing, web testing historically has been how you manage the loading of elements on a page. And that's always been really tricky. Obviously, some elements take longer than others to load. And in the past, you've had to add your own weighting in your tests. And if you don't get those right, it's very difficult. You either end up with too much waiting and your test run times are inflated, or you don't put enough weights in, and you run into problems where you're trying to interact with elements which aren't yet available. With Cypress, you don't have to actually add those weights manually. So Cypress will wait for an element to become visible and interactable before it tries to move on. Cypress actually runs in the browser, so tools like Selenium don't, but Cypress actually runs in the browser, so it's got far more access to what's actually going on in the browser and in the DOM. So it can look at XHR requests and messaging and see what's really happening in the background. And Cypress is also cross-browser-ish. So it started off as a Chrome-only tool, but in recent versions, they've added support for Edge, and as of yesterday, I think, Firefox came out of beta, so they now support Firefox. Firefox now fully. It doesn't support things like WebKit, so you can't run on Safari. So if that's important to you, then Cypress possibly isn't the tool. Equally, it doesn't support mobile testing, so you can change screen aspects and ratio to mimic mobile phone screen sizes, but you can't run Cypress tests against, say, like mobile apps. So the architecture of Cypress. So Cypress supports JavaScript and TypeScript. It heavily uses the idea of JavaScript promises. So kind of every command is a promise in the background. As I mentioned, it runs inside the browser, so it's got full access to everything in the browser, everything in the DOM, everything in the HTML document. So that's really useful. It means you can not only can you see what's going on, but it means you can interact with some of those elements. So you can change them on the fly. You can change the DOM. You can intercept XHR requests. So if you want to mimic what happens when your application gets a HTTP 500 error, or an empty object gets returned, you can do that all through Cypress. You can build that in, and you can build your own sort of mocks as well. So I mentioned earlier that you don't get a lot of choice with Cypress, which is possibly a drawback. I'm not sure, depends what you need it for. But so it uses Mocha as its test runner. So its tests are structured in the Mocha format, which is quite apt because I think it's International Coffee Day today. And it uses try assertions. So again, if there are other test runners, if you wanted to use Jest, you can't. If there are other assertion libraries that you want to use, they're not supported by Cypress as such. Although there are different ways you can do assertions. So let's have a look at a demo. I'm going to open up my Visual Studio Code here, and I'm just going to create a new. So I should mention that I've just installed Cypress, I've already installed it. The reason being is that sometimes it takes a while to install. But if I just open Cypress up, before I go any further, I'm just going to open it up and show you what it looks like. So when you run Cypress for the first time, it actually gives you a whole suite of example tests, which are really useful if you want to see how particular things look, like adding cookies. Just click on this one, for example. Wait for this to load. So you've got a whole set of tests here around how you get and set cookies, which I can show you in the code as well. So this is really handy getting started feature, that you've got a whole set of different specs, different test files that you can look through to understand how it works a bit more. And you get this once you open Cypress for the first time. But I'm going to close that down and come back to it in a minute. Close that down as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a basic Cypress test and explain a bit more about what it's doing and how it's working. So when you create a Cypress project, you get a whole folder structure created for you. One of the things it creates is an integration folder, and that's where all the test files go. Cypress refers to test files as specs. So you'll see that each test file has .spec at the end. You don't have to have .spec, but that's what they suggest. So I'm going to create a new file here. Let's call it demo. Okay, so I've got my blank test file, my JavaScript file. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a references line to the top of my file. And what this does is it allows me to use, it allows VS Code to recognize that I'm writing Cypress, so it will auto-complete my, my code. So as I mentioned earlier, Cypress uses Mocha as its test runner. So we run everything using the Mocha style. And that includes kind of two main code blocks, a describe code block and an it code block. So what a describe is a high level block to group tests together. So for example, your describe block might be login tests. And then within that describe block, you can then have all of your tests which relate to logging in. So you might have a test to successfully log in a user, invalid password, no username, and so on. And each one of these individual tests is added to its own it block. So you'll have a single describe block, and inside that you could have one or many it blocks. So for example, describe block, I'll give it a name. So I'll show you the page in a minute. So I'm going to use this code block to register users. I'm going to create my function. Okay. Cool. So inside my describe block, I can have my it, which will look like. So inside here, let's just a bit better. There we go. Okay. So we have a single describe block, and inside there we have a it block for our test, and all our test code goes in here. So I am going to run my test on this registration page here. And it loads, which is a basic Flask app, allows me to register a user, and then I can add some to-dos for that user. So to navigate to a page in Cypress, we can use the cy.get command. So all the Cypress commands are pre-appended with cy visit. Cy visit command. All the Cypress commands are pre-appended with cy, and then we can navigate to our page. So, like so. Cool. So before I write any code, what I can do now is I can actually run this test. We'll have a look at what it does when it opens. Set my terminal down here. npx. It's open. And that will open up the screen that we saw a minute ago when it opens, and it will allow us to select our test. So this is the one that we've just looked at. So if I open that up, and what it's going to do is it's going to run our test straight away. So it's going to navigate to that page. And it's going to open up our application. So down this left-hand side, we have all of our test steps. This tells me that this test is passing at the moment. And in here, we have access to the application. Now, this isn't just a screenshot of the application, as I mentioned earlier. I can actually interact with this. I can register a user. I can use it just as if I'd opened the application up. What I can also do is I can open up DevTools. So if I want to inspect elements, I can go ahead and inspect elements. And I can also use the Cypress selector playground to help write my test. So if I click the selector playground now, you can see that as I navigate around the application, it's highlighting each element. So if I want to have a look at the username element, I can click on there. And it actually gives me the suggested Cypress command I can use to interact with that particular element. So I can then just copy that to clipboard. go back to my test, add that to my test, and then do whatever I want to do with that particular element. So if I want to type something, I can then use the type command and enter a username. So when I save that now and go back to my application, you can see that it's reloaded it. It started rerunning that test, and we now have another step here. So we've done our visit. We've now found the username field, and we've typed Ryan in there. I can then click through these steps and see exactly what's happened. So on this particular step here, where we've typed Ryan, you can see that it's actually highlighted the field that we're interacting with, and it gives me a before or after option. So this is what it looked like before it completed that step in our test. But if I hit after, you can see exactly what's happened. So likewise, I can then at this point interact, go to my email field, copy that to clipboard, and so on. As I go, I can fill out the rest. So save me doing it again. I think this one will be password. That one, I think, two. I can enter the text in like so. And again, if I save that, it will rerun the test for me. And you can see that it's gone through each step. And again, I can see exactly what's happened at each step before and after it's completed it. So I'll just do the last one now. I'll just submit. Okay, so here I can use the submit, and in this time, instead of typing anything, I can just click on that particular button. If I save that again, it's going to run through my test. It's going to click the register button. It's going to take me to the next screen. And again, like I said, even though we're on a different screen here, if I wanted to see what it previously looked like, where it came from, I can go back to any one of these steps and see exactly what happened. I can still inspect. You know, I can still look around. I can still change things if I want to. And obviously at the point that it's clicked the register button, it's understood that some things have happened in the background. So it's noticed that we're actually on a new URL. It's noticed that all the page is now loaded, and that some of that information has been submitted. So this again is where it's able to understand exactly what's going on in the background. So if I go back to my code now, so I mentioned that Cypress uses chai assertions, so we can then assert based on what we've completed here. So in my application, I might want to check that this message appears here. I might want to check that perhaps that it has navigated to the login page, so I can use my chai assertion to do that. So for example, I can do something like cy.url to check the URL, and then I can use the should keyword to use the assertions. So if I type should now, and then I can type in what insertion I want. you can see that there is a whole host of assertions we can use to check the length of a list, or check if the document has particular properties set. We can look at the cookies, see what cookies are set. In this instance, I'm just going to check that the URL includes, and then I want to say includes what's that? Sorry. Sorry. So again, I'm actually just going to change this because it's going to tell me that that user already exists. So if I just run that now. So close it down a second. Just wait for that to open up. So the other thing that Cypress does is, so we're running everything through the Cypress test, the Cypress test front end at the moment. But what we can also run is tests through the command line, which I will show you in a minute. Don't know why that's the way. Tests. Cool, it's working out. Sorry, I just added something at the top of my test. So if I get my assertion back now and change this data again, hopefully find if I open this back up again. Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry about that. So yeah, so now you can see that it's performed my assertion. It's checked that the URL includes the phrase /login, which it does because it's navigated to the new page. If I were to change this to hello, run it, you can see that it's taking a little bit longer now because it's trying to check that assertion, and then it's failed. So assertions in Cypress are fairly clear, so they come across fairly clear, and the error messaging is usually pretty useful as well. So you can see that this is the exact step it's failed on. Let's change that back. In. Save that, and that's going to rerun. As I mentioned a minute ago, if I don't want to run this via the test runner, which is probably the case if you want to hook this up to sort of the CI/CD pipeline, then instead of using the test runner, you can use the command line instead. So instead of npx open, I can run npx Cypress run, and this will go ahead. And so I haven't specified my particular file. So what this will do now is this will actually load up all of the spec files that it finds in the integration folder. So it's going to run them in the Electron browser as default, because I haven't provided any arguments, but I could, if I wanted to, pass in Chrome as my browser argument, and it would run my tests on Chrome instead. Secondly, I can pass in particular spec files or folders. So if I want to run just a subset of my tests, I can do that via the command line as well. Equally, I can pass in the headful command. So at the moment, everything's running on headless, so you can't see a lot happening other than down here. But if I wanted to run it on headful, I could run everything on headful, and we'd see the browser opening. What's really useful is that if you run your tests, even if you're running them in headless mode, Cypress will automatically create a video, an MP4 file for each of your tests. So if while that's running in the background, if I open that up, you can see that it's creating videos for each of my tests. So if I open this one up, for example, you can actually see that it's recorded that that test is running, much like we saw in the test runner. And that does that by default. It continues. You can see that obviously it's creating a video for each spec file that it finds to run. This may take a little bit more time to run. So I'll go back to my presentation for a minute. I think I can move on to any questions while that's running.
There's been some deep conversations going on. No questions that have gone unanswered so far. I've got a question, but I was going to save it for the end if this is. But yeah, I've got a question around like visual regressions and stuff. So can you get it to do kind of regressions and onion skinning on the images, the screenshots it's taking?
You can. There are certain plugins that you can use to do that. So if you want to do there are a number of sort of JavaScript pixel by pixel visual testing tools out there, which will compare a baseline screenshot to a screenshot that Cypress takes. Cypress has a cy.screenshot command that you can use, so you can take screenshots based on the entire screen, or you can specify like an element, and then you can compare those two. So I know pixel-based visual comparisons can be a little bit flaky sometimes, and so there are tools like Percy and Applitools.
Somebody's just said that on YouTube. I was about to follow up. What is Percy? Sorry, is that a different separate Cypress to Cypress?
Yeah, so it's not a Cypress thing. So Percy is, I think, was just bought by BrowserStack. If you know BrowserStack at all.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just a visual validation or visual testing or visual regression tool. So, but the thing with Percy and Applitools is the other big one. They're not pixel based, so they're kind of more AI powered in the sense that how they understand what's changed. I've not used either of them, but my understanding is that they're pretty good, and you can integrate either of those with Cypress.
Cool.
Awesome. I think they're cheaper versions of Storybooks, Chromatic, I think.
Storybook has got something called Chromatic, did you say?
Well, the company that makes Storybook have a software solution for visual regression testing called Chromatic, which costs
I've come across
a lot.
that. I was going to say, is that the thing that's like £1,200 a month or something crazy?
Not that much, but it's a lot. Yeah.
Interesting. There's been some. You mentioned Storybook. There's been some demos recently on how you can integrate Storybook with Cypress. So people are actually running their Cypress tests on Storybook to test individual components. So they're doing their component testing using Cypress inside Storybook, which is quite interesting.
I was going to say, I've said that Chris was asking around how to potentially launch this on a service that's actually within the repo, the Cypress repo. So Cypress next door to an application. And I literally said, imagine you could run your Cypress tests against those Storybook components as well.
Yeah, you absolutely can. Yeah. And obviously the whole point here being in kind of JavaScript, TypeScript is that it can sit along quite comfortably along with your sort of front-end code repository. So yeah, it integrates quite well with that sort of thing. Yeah.
Cool. Sounds like Hamza might be volunteering to do a Percy talk if I can twist his arm a little bit. He says he works in the backyard. He means back end. I'll let you off then, Hamza. Anyway, sorry.
So
there was a question, sorry.
Go on.
Ryan, do you have any experience using Cypress in parallel, meaning two browsers coordinating with each other?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. I think that's one of the kind of limitations of Cypress. It's possible. So one of the things Cypress have is so Cypress is open source, but they have a dashboard which you can purchase. I think it's got a sort of monthly license, and I think that allows you to do parallelization a bit easier. But equally, there are ways to do it without that. So some people are using sort of features inside their CI tools. So if you're using Circle CI or something like that, you can use those to sort of parallelize your tests.
I'm assuming Azure DevOps comes under that CI?
Yeah.
There's a question from Gundeep in chat, so I thought, maybe.
Yeah, that's fine. So I think with why I use Circle CI as an example is that there's I forget the phrase. I think they use the phrase org. Is it org for Circle CI, which is basically a predefined YAML file which you can add to your pipeline, which has got all the Cypress config predefined. So it's relatively easy to set up. But yeah, you can use it in whatever CI/CD pipeline you're working on.
I was just talking to my partner Mez, because she does a lot of QA basically on like applications that they then have to support. So it'd be nice to obviously detect those issues before users start to detect them.
Yes.
So that involves a lot of clicking around, checking things are working and stuff. These could be quite easily run. I was then checking GitHub offers scheduled workflows.
Yeah.
So run their actions on a schedule, run it and get a failed report to say that a production app is now out of it's failing.
There's some Docker images out there as well that you can use to, so if you're using something like GitHub Actions, then you can spin up a Docker container and run your tests for a container. Which, actually, going back to the visual testing thing, is something that is suggested, that if you are doing any form of visual testing, take your baseline screenshots using the same Docker image that you would run your test in, because otherwise you get a whole host of confusion with sort of screen ratios, and particularly the pixel-based stuff, it doesn't really work. So using something like Docker kind of helps in that respect to keep everything consistent.
Yeah, makes sense. Works on my machine, let's ship it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm no Cypress expert, as you can probably tell, but I think it's worth kind of shouting about a bit, because it does provide something. To me it feels like the front end testing equivalent of Postman, where it's quite developer friendly in the same, just as much as tester friendly. So I think it's good in that respect. It's kind of a mechanism for sort of bridging that gap between sort of dev and test, and then you get into the whole debate about who is responsible for testing and who should be writing tests.
QAs and testers are responsible for the tests. Leave it at that.
No.
How can you
write my own tests?
I was joking. Everyone's responsible. It's a team effort, Ryan.
There we go. Yeah.
We fail together or we succeed together.
Exactly.
Yeah. Vitas, any recommendations for how much to stub? So is that mocking? I guess. Yes, stubbing out.
Not really anything you're not in control of. So if you're relying on external services, it's probably better to stub that. Anything you're not overly interested in the purpose of that particular test. So one of the things that I was going
to say, even then with integration testing and E2E testing, you want it integrating with as much of the stuff as possible, right? If Twitter changes their response, or when one of those third-party APIs changes those responses, that you want that to trigger a fail as well.
Absolutely. There's definitely a place for that, and I think if you're expecting particular responses in a particular format, then you definitely need to test that. Where a tool like where stubbing is really useful is actually if you want to see just how your application is going to handle getting something back that you are unlikely to get back very often, like an empty object or a internal serve error if an external API goes down or something like that, just to see how your application handles that without certainly if you're not in control of the API to sort of mimic that stuff is difficult without mocking.
Hi, Twitter. I don't.
Yeah, do you mind just switching? Yeah, do you mind switching off a minute? But yeah, I mean, obviously we didn't cover is you can do API testing as well with Cypress. So it's got particular commands to call HTTP services. So one of the ways you can use Cypress, which is quite useful, is for kind of data setup. So if I was doing a login test, for example, I might want to use a sort of an API, backend API, to create the user up front. So if I'm doing a login front end test, I don't want the test to start with registering the user because it's slow and flaky. Whereas if I can call an API to create that user and then just use that user in my login test, so you can do stuff like open up this. You can create sort of custom commands, so you can create your own cy dot command, which might actually be a set of commands in the background. So if I look at this login, for example, don't know if this has got any of them, but find one which has got one. Yeah, okay, so this is this probably doesn't make much sense, but this is deleting a to-do, basically. So I can do things like I can call this external API that I've created in here, register user API, to actually register my user, and then I can use those within my actual test. So here I've got my cy.request, which is a register user API. It takes the username and email and a password, and that goes and creates my user for me. And then to call that in my test, where it was, maybe this one. I can start by actually calling that register user rather than having to actually register it as part of the
test. Does it ship with any kind of like factories for generating? So I saw you were changing, like updating the username and stuff earlier manually, but does it come with any kind of factories for generating that kind of stuff, or is that something you need to rely on another package for?
So again, it doesn't, nothing built in, but you can integrate with things like Faker.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So yeah, in that example, it might be quite useful to integrate with Faker.
Keep it simple, yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing you can do, again, which we haven't touched on in, if I go to this one. So you can, so you can do stuff like within your describe block, you can add things like before each so then within your sort of before each block, you can add a set of steps to complete before you actually run the test. So for example, if each of my tests requires you to visit register, that probably ends up going in the syntax isn't right for this, but that probably ends up going in my before each block, which means if I've got additional ifs, then I can get rid of these because I know it's going to run in my before each block. Equally, you can have a after each block. So if you want to clear everything out, again, if you want to call an API to delete all the data you've just included, you could add that to your after block just to clear everything away.
I'll be honest, the idea of an endpoint in my back end that clears my entire database, Ryan, is giving me all feelings.
Well,
but yeah, sure.
you know,
If the testers want it, the testers get it.
Yeah, that drop tables API, you know.
Yeah, the drop tables API.
Yeah.
Odd Bobbies.
Yeah.
/ Bobby.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. All right, I'm going to give a shout out to YouTube for any final last questions before we end the stream. Thanks to everyone for joining. Have to wait a good 20-30 seconds for the lag to catch up, you know. Well, we shall move into the private section of the Zoom call. As I discussed with Paramjit, apologies for pronouncing your name incorrect. Join the meetup if you want to be on the Zoom call next time and see our lovely faces. But for now, yeah. Thanks, YouTube.
Thank you.
Oh, there's a few thank yous coming through.